Good evening, everybody. My name is David Weisberg. I am the CEO of the Federation for Jewish Philanthropy of Upper Fairfield County. I want to start out by wishing you a happy Passover, Chag Sameach, whether you've been able to have seders together with some of your family in person or whether you've met with folks over Zoom. I hope it has been a meaningful and joyous holiday for you so far. One of the silver linings of this challenging time that we're still in is that I have yet another opportunity to be together with so many of you through the wonders of the internet. And one of the magical things that happens when we've done these programs is that we've been able to join together with folks not only from our own Jewish community here in Connecticut, but tonight we indeed have friends signed up from Virginia and from Georgia and from Florida. And this time there are folks from Florida other than my father, so really folks from Florida. And so I'm so glad that all of you could join with us tonight for a really special conversation with a wonderful member of our Upper Fairfield County Jewish community, who I've just had the opportunity to meet, and really an amazing person for multiple reasons. Not only because she co-founded one of the toy-making giants of the world in Melissa and Doug, a mammothly successful company, but because she's recently courageously and transparently shared the story of her own struggle with anxiety and depression in this beautiful book called LifeLines that we're going to be talking about tonight. And so I'm pleased to welcome to join us wonderful member of our Upper Fairfield County Jewish community, Melissa Bernstein. Good evening, Melissa. How are you?
Hi, David, and thanks everyone for joining. I really appreciate it. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm so excited you're here too. Happy Passover. It's good to see you.
Thank you. Same to you.
You know, we have a lot of things that I want to talk to you about, but first, I just need to be a fan for a second as a fan of your toys. 10 days ago, I was with my 2.5-year-old granddaughter, Shoshana, watching her paint on her Melissa and Doug easel. And I looked at the other side of the room and there was her Melissa and Doug mop, broom, and dusting set that we had bought her for Hanukkah, which she loves because she loves to clean. And what a piece of genius in a toy, because not only does she love to clean, but her parents love if they have a child who will mop and clean and dust the house. What could be better than that? So for the joy you bring my granddaughter and have brought my children and children throughout the world, I mean, it must feel incredibly gratifying to know the smiles that you have brought to so many children throughout the world.
Oh, that is so sweet. I mean, we're just gratified that people have supported open-ended play because, you know, we're champions of play that really ignites a child's imagination and allows them to really take control of their form of play. So I think in this world of technology overuse, we're just so thrilled that many are still embracing the wonder of open-ended play.
And it's nice to see, you know, my granddaughter not holding a screen sometimes.
Exactly.
And playing. So thank you for doing that. Now, I want to talk about your book, but first, for so many members of our community who don't know you and you're one of our neighbors, I want to let everyone get to know Melissa Bernstein a little bit. So Melissa, where did you grow up?
Gosh, I grew up in a few different places. I spent my very early time in Media, Pennsylvania. Then we moved to Boulder, Colorado. And then as a junior in high school, I moved to Westport, Connecticut, where I still am today. Okay,
wonderful. I was going to ask you how you got to Westport. You've just answered that question. And what kind of kid were you? Were you incredibly creative and playful?
No. I was, I'd say, a very heady, introverted, overly thoughtful, ruminating, creative person who didn't really embrace her creativity.
Right. Did you have a favorite toy?
My favorite toy was my imagination. I mean, I basically didn't have a lot of toys, and I wrote verses, I wrote music, I made things out of like twigs and sticks and leaves, and really, I would say, use my hands to create from the time I was very little.
Right. And let's jump forward a bunch. When did you meet Doug?
Oh gosh, it was kind of, you might say, that Jewish matchmaking of the parents, because I think our parents met each other when we moved to Westport, and he was older than I, and we never met each other, but they always kind of wanted us to meet because we're both, Jewish parents. And I think they hoped that, we would marry in the faith. And we didn't meet for years. And then, as he says, at one very weak, desperate moment, he decided to call me. And I was 19, and we spoke for a few hours. And then I think he said something like, do you want to meet for dinner? And sort of the rest is history. I met him when I was 19, and 35 years later, we're still together with, and we joke, he always says, we conceived a business out of wedlock because we started our business when we were just dating.
And toys, how did you come upon a toy business?
Yeah, I mean, that's a kind of a fascinating one, because I think we were both right out of school. Those were the days when you didn't just up and start a company. It was unheard of. There was no such thing as like startup. The word startup didn't exist. The word unicorn didn't exist. Like, you basically studied in school what you were going to pursue as your career and got on the treadmill and followed that to the end of your life. And I think we started in traditional careers because that's what society told us we had to do. And right out of the get-go, we were both absolutely miserable. And, I felt like a flower without sunlight and water. I was just beside myself. And I got to the point, I am already low to begin with in my chemical balance. I got to the point when I could barely get out of bed because I didn't know why I was going to work each day. So we decided that we were going to go away for one fateful weekend and not come back until we decided what we were going to do together, because we knew we had to do something that brought our lives meaning. So we went away and we immediately honed in on children, because all of our parents in some form or fashion were involved in children's teaching or principal or guidance counselor. And we knew we loved children. And we thought if we could do something that would impact a child, there would be no greater gift for us or to them. And we honed in on children. And then we honed in, there's a lack of really good, wholesome children's products in the world. What if we could create products that sort of harkened back to the timeless toys of the past, but injected them with a pizzazz that really made them much more fresh and current.
And you have 6 children of your own now?
We do. We not only created toys, but we created children. We were creators.
And I imagine these are children who grew up playing with Melissa and Doug toys.
Well, we started Melissa and Doug before we had children, but they did end up becoming really important to the process in being incredible sort of research for me and watching how they played and how their play patterns were lacking or flawed, and also in ultimately really testing the products quite a bit. And they became very critical users of our products. And I think I got to the point when I was like, are they going to say anything is a good toy? Because they would really, sort of rake it over the coals in a good way and really help me to improve it so that it was a better play experience for other kids.
Right. And you and Doug are successful beyond anyone's imagination. You could move anywhere. You've decided to continue to raise your children in the Jewish community of Westport. So tell me a little bit about your life here and what makes this home for you in our Jewish community.
Doug loves Westport more than anywhere in the world. And my kids call him the mayor of Westport because he's been here since he was like 2 or 3 years old. And he knows almost everyone. And you can't even, we walk every day, and I'm always loath to walk with him because our walk that's supposed to be timed because we have a lot going on is inevitably like an hour longer because he stops, and it's sweet, but not when you have like a time limit. He talks to everyone because he loves it so much. So I think for him, this place was such, it meant warmth and all his good memories. And I think I didn't have a great experience, but I'm happy to say that having been here now and had my children go through and have such wonderful experiences, like I'm so glad that I was able, now I love Westport so much, and it's been so good to my family. And I'm glad I was able to kind of, change my negative cognition that was just from high school into a positive one through, living here for so many years.
Right. Right. So I want to get to this next project of yours. And as I said, you're successful beyond anyone's imagination. Mm-hmm. You have a beautiful home and a beautiful place and a beautiful family and a thriving business. And maybe you're happy but not content, or mm-hmm. Well off but not settled. Like, just describe that feeling of what you were feeling and when it started in your life as well.
That's an amazing question. Yeah, I felt off from the very first time I had thoughts. I was born with something that I now know is called existential depression, which is a crisis of meaning. And when you're born with a crisis of meaning, it's really unsettling, and you don't feel at home in yourself. You don't feel at home in the world. And you actually I felt like I was put here and like they made a mistake. Like, mm-hmm. Why am I here? Like, this doesn't make any sense. I don't belong here. And I asked myself 3 questions from probably the moment I could form words, which were, why am I here? What is the meaning of life if we are ultimately mortal and will die? And the third, what am I meant to do here in my brief time that will give my life and others meaning? And because I couldn't verbalize those questions, much less receive answers to them, I lived in utter despair because I truly thought that everything I was doing was futile and couldn't understand why everyone around me acted so carefree and that like life was amazing. And I just couldn't understand the hypocrisy of like, if life is so, so dismal and the clock of mortality is ticking, why doesn't anyone else seem to know it? And why are they acting like everything is so perfect? And I just could never get over the hypocrisy of that. So because I couldn't get answers to my questions and I couldn't find the meaning I sought, I basically engaged in 2 behaviors. One was whenever I could, I retreated, or I guess you could say I soared off into my imagination, which was the only place that for me was blissful and I could control. And it was, euphoric because I had 2 imaginary friends and I could escape sort of the pain of living here in the world. And when I couldn't do that, because sometimes, unfortunately, I had to be here in the world, then I ended up effectively disassociating, repressing, and denying anything I felt and everything that made me who I was. Because who I was an overly hypersensitive person who had all these like acute sensitivities that really were stigmatizing when I showed them to the world. So I knew that I couldn't ever show who I truly was and had to really hide it in order to fit in.
Right. So you just put up a brave front as opposed to telling other people, I think there's something wrong.
I did. I actually adopted a facade of utter perfection and did the smile and did the everything's perfect, great, and really clung to achievement, to validation, and to perfection as my only forms of self-worth. So I became this incredibly high achieving perfectionist whose only form of worth was based on the gold stars and the grades and the pats on the back.
And that's a facade you kept up from being a child until Until when?
Until dots started connecting in my late 40s. And I kept it up through, and I didn't know any different. It wasn't like I was saying, guess what? I'm fooling everyone, Melissa. Like I believed the lie myself, because the feelings that were so deep and dark were so threatening to submerge me. And the voice in my head, I had a very bad voice in my head that told me to end my life over and over and over because it was so futile. The only way I could effectively repress that voice was to just fake it and push it down so deeply that I wouldn't allow it to come up. But it did manifest, the lack of control I felt over my mind that told me these negative things did manifest in some self-punishing behaviors that did show up my whole life, in disordered eating and tremendous issues with control. So it wasn't like I thought I was keeping it, from everyone, but of course, in my behaviors, it did show.
Right. Can I ask if you sought help earlier in your life, or only until recently?
It's a great question. I never sought help because I never admitted I needed help. And if someone would have, even at my lowest weight, when I had a severe eating disorder, if someone would have said to me, and they did say to me, wow, you look really thin. Is everything okay? I would have looked at them like, what do you mean, is everything okay? Of course it's okay. Why would you say that? And I would really take offense. And almost that was my way of making them go away, because they would be like, okay, everything's okay. And I really didn't, it was my blind spot. I had no idea that I was so afflicted because I didn't admit it. So to get help, you have to admit you need help. And nobody in my life ever said I needed help. And I didn't admit I needed help. So no, I did not get help until very late in life.
Right. It seems that there's also something about being able to put a name to something. I've been in the position where, my stomach hurts and I go to 3 different doctors and everyone says, you're okay. And I say, I just want to know that something is wrong with you. So tell me about when you were able to put a name to it and what that felt like to be able to say, wait a minute, this is something.
That's a great question, because, often labels are not a good thing. And the last thing you want is to be labeled. But in my case, it was the greatest thing that ever happened. So it relates to Judaism in a few ways. I listened to this amazing podcast by this guy, Jonathan Fields, who's Jewish, actually. And it's called The Good Life Project. And I loved this podcast. And it had so many soulful people, a lot of my favorite people. And they talked about beautiful, life experiences and profound insights. And I loved it. And Jonathan Fields always talked about his favorite book, which was Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, which details his experience in Auschwitz. And I had it in my bookshelf and I had read it in my 20s. But it's funny, sometimes something you read early in life doesn't connect until you are ready for it. So I decided to read it again in my 40s. And that was the first dot that really changed my life, because at the end of the book, not even in the body, Viktor Frankl, after he got out of the camp, he starts to engage in what he called logotherapy, a form of existential analysis. And those words changed my life. I had been alive 48 years, had read the thesaurus for fun, and had never heard the word existential, never heard the word logotherapy. And when I looked them up, I realized, oh my goodness, this is what I have been afflicted with my whole life. And it basically said that man's primary motivation in life is the search for meaning, and coming to terms with, how we find that meaning can lead to tremendous despair and angst. And it was like, yep. And so I started to research and realized, with more profound, I call it shalation, shock and elation, that those who had experienced existential despair also tended to be highly creative. And some of the most prolific creatives ever had experienced this big depth of meaningless crisis, and further learned that those who are highly creative and have existential despair happen to also have what's called overexcitabilities, which is this heightened arousal of their central nervous system, which makes their sensitivity to life and life experiences much more acute than other people. And when I read about these 5 overexcitabilities, I don't think I stopped crying for about 3 days, because I was a dictionary definition of all 5 of them, which is like unheard of, because usually you have one of them. And I realized that this was who I was, and every quality that gave me this ability to create from nothing, I call it the boundlessness of imagination, were the things that I tried to kill my entire life because they were so stigmatizing. So I saw that I had a blurse, which is a blessing and a curse, and that my ability to create was because of these stigmatizing qualities that gave me this heightened sensitivity to both the beauty and the pain of the world.
Right. And by the way, it occurs to me that there's also something very Jewish about going back and reading the same book again, as you did with Viktor Frankl's book. You know, we read the Torah every year. And people say, well, why do you read the same thing every year? The stories don't change. And the answer is yes, but we change.
Yes.
We change.
Yep.
And so it seems to me that that's part of your story.
And I wrote a verse, you know, you can walk a path 100 times without a second thought, for it won't be fathomed differently or offer wisdom sought, till the power of awareness grants lucidity of seeing all the wonder ever present and the joy of holy being. So, you know, that's what I say even about, because I hike a lot, like every time you walk a trail, you see something new if you have that lucidity of awareness.
Right. So you have your awakening, you have your discovery, you seek a professional, a partner to help you through the next part of your journey?
Well, actually, what happened then is once I had the aha moment in that knowing, oh my gosh, I'm not the first person to suffer from this, and I'm not alone. Like, not being alone was this revelation, because I thought I was on another planet alone. I knew I had to go on the Good Life Project and come out with my truth. So out of the blue, never knew him, contacted Jonathan Fields and told him, I want to come out on your show and tell the world that I'm afflicted with this, because if I'm just discovering it at age 48, I know so many others have to feel this way as well. And I don't want them to suffer in silence like I did for decades. So I went on his podcast. I shared my truth for the very first time. I had never shared it with anyone, and no one still knew. Other than Doug, you know, it was literally, and Doug found out at the same time I did. So he was the only one that knew. And I ended up receiving hundreds of the most beautiful, poignant, profound letters ever, with folks saying things like, you know, you were the first person to ever give voice to what was ineffable for me. And, you know, I can't thank you enough. And now I need to know, how do I find my light? So, you know, that showed me that there were many, many, many others in darkness as I was, but our only difference was I had found my light through creativity by that point, and they were still looking for theirs. So that really became my life mission, to help others turn their darkness into light.
Wonderful. And I want to keep moving forward because there's so much I want to talk to you about. I also want to let those who are viewers know that you're going to have an opportunity to ask questions as well. The best way to do that will be to type that into the chat feature, or if you want to be bold and raise your virtual hand when we open up for questions in probably about 15 minutes, I can try to actually bring you on live with us. If I do, and you have your camera on.
And anything goes, no question is off limits. You're not wearing your
pajamas or something like that if you don't want everyone to see you in your pajamas, but we'd love to have you join us. So I want to talk about this, this big, beautiful book. And first of all, it is indeed big and beautiful, and I've really enjoyed going through it. It is a lovely, professional, beautiful, like attractive, meaningful book. When I open it up and start going through it, there's some prose, but there's mostly verse. There's mostly poetry. And so tell everyone what this is. What is this book?
Wow. This book is three parts. It's a memoir. It's my story. separated into volumes. It's the verses, which I call my lifelines, that kept me alive all my years, because there was such chaos reigning in my head that from the time I was 2 years old, these rhyming verses would come into my head completely intact. And I realize now, were my way of trying to make some sense out of the senseless. And they really were the truest expressions of my soul. But I was so terrified of sharing them with the world, because many of them were very dark, certainly early on, that I hid them from the world. And when I went to put this book together, I had over 3,000 verses hidden away that I sort of unshrouded for the very first time and put just about 1,000 of them just in this book. And then the third part of it is nature is one of my most powerful lifelines, and it's one of the volumes of the book. And I love to photograph nature because I love to capture these beautiful, exquisite moments that and keep them sort of alive forever. It's part of the eternity that I seek. So it's interspersed, the prose and the verses are interspersed with these beautiful photos of some of my very favorite places in the world, where I found a lot of peace and written a lot of my verses.
So I'm glad you explained to me that there were 3,000 verses and you put 1,000 in there. I was asking myself that question, and I was going to ask you, did you put everything in? But knowing that you chose, what's
and I write them every day. So every day I write another 5 or 6. So even since I wrote the book, I have another 500 that I've written.
What's the process for you of going through 3,000 verses and picking out the 1,000 that you're going to put in your book?
It was one of the hardest processes ever, because to me, they were my children and they had saved me. So the first thing I did, it's such a good question. So the verses themselves determined the volumes of this book, because those were the pieces of Melissa that I had denied my whole life. And those verses really reflect every thought, every question, every fear that I ever had. And they were trying to answer my questions that kept coming up. So I took those it was like 3,500 verses, and I actually categorized them. I started putting them in piles of what the theme was. And it turned out they fell perfectly into 11 different categories, which are the exact 11 categories of the book. And really what they were the pieces of a very highly sensitive Melissa that I had denied and repressed my whole life. But when I looked at them, because one of my misperceptions, I think, and the reason I denied who I was, is I thought I was utter darkness. I thought that it was like a demon that raged in me that tried to destroy me, and there was no light in me. And when I actually had the courage to look at those verses and divide them out, I realized if you look at sort of the volumes and you say which are really despairing and which aren't, it's exactly equal. Right. And in fact, it might be 6 and 5, like one more that's light. So it's even like I'm actually right in the middle, or even a tad above the equanimous line in the middle. And that was such a revelation to me that I'm not all darkness, actually. And when I looked at the verses, like some of my favorites are about nature. They're about the beauty of the world and the little tiny, extraordinary in the ordinary. So I was able to actually see myself without the negative cognitions. And it gave me some perspective that I wasn't as dark and ugly and despairing as I believed I was.
And is it your hope that folks will get this book and read it from page 1 straight through, or that it's there for inspiration? Open it up when you need a verse and you need to connect.
It could be anything. It does tell a story in an order, but the reason they're called volumes is because each one can be read independently too. It's not like one sentence ends and then the next one sort of continues. They're all separate as well. So I think my goal in writing it was to show others that they're not alone. And, I was as raw as it got. And I had many come to me, many actual publishers, and say, you should do a book. You should have cute anecdotes about your kids. You should have photos of Melissa and Doug and tell all the stories, because we have so many cool stories about success and failure and copycats. And I was like, no, that would be more of my facade. That would be the life I had lived up until then. And this wasn't about that at all. This was about, I am going to take off the mask. I am going to show that people who look like they have it all are the same as everybody else. And although I might have achieved an American dream definition of success, and indeed did, because there's nothing I could ever want materially or even in terms of our company success, that doesn't mean that life is perfect. And I was born with existential depression. It is part of who I am. I will die with it. And my life now has been about creating a practice, and I call it my toolbox of lifelines, that enable me to live the best life I can live. It means I'm going to get up many days and I'm going to be super low because I do this holistically. And my medicine is I have to be deliberate about my practice, or I will fall below and may not come back. That's how, tenuous living with despair is. But if I maintain my practice, I can also find profound joy each and every day and really live a wholehearted life, despite the fact that I have a mental affliction. Right. So I really wanted to show others that you can live with a mental affliction. You can treat it yourself by, deliberately engaging in a practice, and you can still find joy each day, but it doesn't mean any of us is going to live like this carefree, happy life and never have to work at it.
Right. It's such an important message. What I would love to do, if you were up for it, on this notion of being able to read something again and again and finding something different each time, I would love to open up the book randomly and read a verse to you. And
I'd love it.
You've written, and tell me, if you have any sense of when you wrote it, but more importantly, what it means to you now.
Yeah. And by the way, in my audiobook, that is what I did. Because I couldn't read all the verses, it would have taken too long. I basically picked my very favorite verses and talked about exactly the feelings behind them.
So here's the one I opened to first.
Okay.
And I also want others who are watching this to be able to hear some of this as well, so they understand some of the beauty that's in this book. Though I tell myself I shouldn't care what others think or say, in reality, I'm desperate for their praise to feel okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's the scourge of perfectionism that really almost did me in. I shouldn't, and the shame in feeling it. Basically it was like, I know I shouldn't need others to validate me to feel good about myself, but the truth is I desperately need their praise. And I think that's what I lived with my whole life. When you seek it from out there, outside yourself, and you don't have it inside, you're left forever seeking. You're never whole.
I'm going to read you one more. It's our flaws that make us human, for perfection just impedes us from forging the communion our soul desperately needs.
That's another one in the perfection section. You're in perfection. Yeah, I mean, I think, perfection is in the head, right? It's our head telling us we have to achieve a certain ideal. Communion is in the heart. Mm-hmm. So when we're tethered to perfection, we can't find real communion in our heart with anyone or anything. It's really, perfection is a prison that we live in. And that's why when I was a perfectionist, I had no real relationships with anyone or anything. It was all about achieving an unattainable goal. Right. And very desperate.
Did you stumble upon anything when you were going through those 3,000 verses that you said, you know what, this doesn't resonate with me anymore?
Nope, not one. Not one. They were all like, and I cried and I laughed and it was like discovering your lost children. It was the most incredible feeling. And, I was told very early on, one of the stories in the book is we had a hiccup in our business, Doug and I, and we decided we were going to leave toys forever and apply to graduate school. And I applied to an MFA program for poetry. And my words were rejected by the head of the department and called basically too simple to ever dignify a program. And, that really validated what I always believed, which was my creativity wasn't good enough. And, that's why I never did it early on because I was terrified of the darkness. But then in my 20s, when I finally had the courage to say, I want to be a writer and be seen as maybe even a poet, I was so profoundly rejected that I still don't call my verses ever poetry. I call them verses because I determined at that moment that they would never be real poetry. So it was, it was that heartbreaking. So when I pulled them out of the shadows 30 years later and read them again, it was just like, I was kind of coming home to myself for the very first time.
Maybe what that professor didn't understand is that, much like your toys, sometimes things are simply beautiful.
Exactly. That is exactly. And I say, that professor had me, I stopped writing for 25 years. I didn't write another verse. But I did channel that same philosophical belief that there is profound in the simple into making the toys. So at least I did make 10,000 toys in that same time span that did have that same philosophy behind that.
So the other extraordinary thing I have to mention about this book is that both in the opening pages and then in case anyone missed it, again, inside the back cover is your personal email address.
Yeah.
Is if you need to be in touch with me, if you need to reach out to me personally, here's my personal email address in a book that's, one of Amazon's top sellers now. So what's become of that? Tell me what your inbox looks like these days.
Yeah, I have my entire life. It's not inconsistent with how I've lived my life. My whole life, I've always said to anybody, whenever I speak, whenever I do anything, contact me personally. And I beg them because I seek that real connection. I've never really had it. So anytime someone has written me, I've always written back. And I've never had that many people reach out to me, to be honest. So, I'll get 2, 3, 5, 6, and it's always been very easy in the course of my life to respond to them. But I was on a piece on CBS Sunday Morning, and I received close to 10,000 letters. And that completely threw me for a loop because I realized that my promise to respond to every single person and show them they're seen and heard, I might not be able to deliver on that. And that almost put me in a very dark place. I actually went into a black hole for a couple of days because I felt so overwhelmed by the amount of despair that hit me and the number of people that felt unseen and unheard and wanted to connect and tell me their story that I didn't know how I'd ever be able to show them they're seen. So, but I'm doing it. As I said, it's probably going to take me a few months, but every day I'm dedicating a few really focused hours and I'm responding to them one by one. Right. And I'm making my way through it in the order they came in. So it's the best I can do. And I had to get some therapeutic help to make me understand that I can't save everyone who reaches out to me. All I can do is do the best I can do as one person.
Right, which is incredible. I want to do a couple of things. The first thing I want to do is invite those who have questions to type them into the chat now, because we're going to get to questions very soon. So you can either, as I said, type them into the chat, or if you want to raise your virtual hand, I can bring you into the conversation. I'm going to want to talk about your new website next. But before I do that, I just want to let everyone know, if you want to buy the book, there's lots of places to buy the book. You can buy it on Amazon, all of your typical places. One of the places that we've been encouraging folks to buy books lately is on bookshop.org. I've shown you on your screen right here, Melissa's book on bookshop.org. At a time that many local businesses are struggling, bookshop.org is a site that was created to help support your independent local bookstores. And so if you care about your independent local bookstores, just like Melissa and Doug have sold their toys in, both the big sellers and independent toy stores as well, that's just a wonderful place to buy your books, is on bookshop.org. So I want to encourage you to go
Thank
there
you.
to buy Melissa's wonderful book.
Oh, thank you for doing that.
And so on top of the book wasn't enough in and of itself, and you wanted to seek to create more opportunities and portals for those who want to go on this, have the same kind of discovery and go on the same kind of journey that you did. And so you've created this wonderful website called LifeLines as well. I'll share on my screen now. It has, you know, things like welcome to the hike, and really kind of both a metaphorical and real journey that you're inviting folks to join you on, that includes things like a backpack and compasses and leaves and trail markers. And so explain a little bit about what's that all about and what folks can expect to see if they go to the LifeLines website.
Sure. So, you know, Doug and I have been so fortunate in 32 years of making toys and receiving so much goodness from doing that, that we wanted to have this be our passion project and give back to so many who are feeling alone and in despair now. So I took this journey, you know, the second half of, once I had all these epiphanies, I knew that I needed to stop racing outside myself for that validation in perfection and finally make the journey inward and accept myself for who I was. And that journey took me to admit for the first time that I needed professional help, because I knew I couldn't make that journey alone, because at the base of it was the existential despair and it was going to be too dark. So I enlisted the help of a trained professional and made this journey inward. That became the most, wow, it was the most arduous, but the most epiphanies you could ever imagine. And when I came out of it, it had changed my life to such an extent. And I felt such a weight come off me that I had been carrying my whole life. I shed my leaves, that I wanted to recreate this. And I think Doug was my partner in, I said to him, like, I see this journey so clearly. It is a pilgrimage, you know, that I took myself, and I want to bring it alive on this ecosystem so that others can take it too. And it's free. You know, it cost me a fortune because I had to pay for psychotherapeutic help in doing it, but I can now recreate it and make it so that others can take it for nothing, you know, for free. So Doug was my partner in figuring out how to take something, you know, which is the odyssey of product creation, something that's in someone's head, and make it a visual virtual experience online.
Right. And do you have a sense of folks taking the journey and build the community that you're building?
I do. I mean, we've had so many scores of people take it. And I think, you know, it's like any journey. It's not a new journey. I mean, the hero's journey is the same journey that takes you back to yourself. It was just my way. You know, I need things very simple. I am a simple person, and that's why my toys and my verses are so simple. I needed a metaphor to make it really simple, which was the word space, SPACE, because what I sought my whole life was to finally get space between my burdened head and my heart that just wanted peace.
Right. And that's your space trail markers, right?
Yep. And every letter, when I would always say to myself, all I want is space. All I want is space, because I wasn't able to look at my head objectively. And my head told me a lot of mistruths and had this poison in it that tried to hurt me. So it was only when I could get the space between my heart that just wanted to soar freely and my head that wanted to tell me bad things, that I could see my head for what it was and begin to tell myself another truth. So yes, every letter of the journey is another series of exercises designed to get us more in touch with who we are. And, you know, I worked with this wonderful meditation and yoga expert who created these beautiful exercises specifically for our journey. And it was a wonderful process. So I think if you're at the point where you're ready to take it, because if you're not ready to take it, it won't, you'll say, it didn't do anything for me. And anyone who says it doesn't do anything for me, it means they need to take it again.
Right.
And it never ends either, unfortunately. Like, you don't just take it once and you're like, okay, done the journey. I mean, I will be taking that journey till my last breath. Right. Because like you said, every time you take it, it's completely different because you as the journeyer, the hiker, have changed.
Right, absolutely. So I have some questions that I'm taking in that I want to relate to you. One is about the decision to self-publish your book. As you said, you've had people come to you in the past and say, why don't you do a book or on this and that? And you certainly have, you know, a level of success and recognition that you didn't have to self-publish. So tell me about the decision to self-publish and whether that was about freedom or speed or.
It's an amazing question and actually has a deeper story. So, you know, I did have a number of publishers come to me about a book about Melissa and Doug or a book on parenting. And I knew that there was only one book I really wanted to write, which was this story, because it was sort of the story that I knew would connect me to people who had existential despair like myself and maybe didn't have the pathway out. And I ultimately did enlist a literary agent, one of the most well-known in New York City, to help me in this process. And, you know, she really wanted to help me craft exactly what the book would be like and exactly how it would flow. And this book truly just poured out of me. And it took me maybe 2.5 months to write the entire thing. Because I'd been waiting 50 years for this. It was like the biggest child I had never given birth to. And when I sat down to put together everything, it just flew. So I never sent her an outline. And I basically one day, because she was like, where is it? Where is it? And I was like, surprise, here's the book. And I sent her the entire book from beginning to end. And she took a few days. And then she wrote me back one of the most despairing letters of my life. She basically said, I can't believe you did that, because this is not at all what will sell. And she said, one, you wrote a memoir, and that is the worst genre you could do. And two, it has verse, and verses like never sell. So you have put together the two worst genres. And this is, you need to make this a self-help book. You need to have concrete advice. You need to have cute anecdotes. And she went on and on and on. And as I read it, I was sobbing, because this is what had happened to me my whole life, right? Whenever I showed my creativity in its authenticity, it was always rejected by mainstream conventional society. And she had published like some of the bestsellers. And she basically said, this won't sell. So I didn't even show my husband. For 2 days. I sat on that letter and I was like, oh my gosh, this is the truest expression of who I am. And I was just told by the top literary agent in the city that it's not going to sell. Like, what do I do? And finally, I showed Doug. And as he read it, instead of looking horrified, he started laughing and laughing and laughing. And he looked at me after and he said, Melissa, did you think it would be any different? Has anything you've ever done been, you know, embraced with open arms by mainstream society? And I was like, no. He's like, so why do you think it would be any different now? And he said, in fact, if it had been embraced, that would mean it probably wasn't going to touch the people it's meant to touch. So he said, we're going to do this just like we did everything else. We don't need her. We don't need a publisher. We will do it just like we've done our toys. You know, we didn't hire anyone to distribute those for us. So we went to the other extreme. We made the best quality book you could ever make for the lowest possible price. I mean, it's a coffee table book that traditional publishers would have charged $50, $60 for. You know, we literally are breaking even on it so that we can distribute it to a wide group of people. And we didn't edit one word. You know, it is exactly as it came out of me. And when it hit #1 in all books on Amazon, it was like, it wasn't so much, again, I don't care about the ego of it. It was just, when you do something in your truth, in your true authenticity, and it, you know, gets received in that, and people appreciate it for that, there is just no greater reward. So I think it was just validation for me that I just have to keep, vibing my truth and never changing it to meet society's expectation.
Right. So I've got a couple questions about partnerships along your journey. One, about your partnerships with professionals, psychologists, therapists, counselors, et cetera, what those partnerships have been like. And then there's your partnership with Doug along your journey, and what kind of partner he's been. Gosh,
well, I'll start with Doug. I mean, Doug has been the best partner, and I think he's been so supportive, and his desire to make this dream of mine come true has been nothing short of just so heartwarming. I mean, he wants me to, be happy, which I never quite will be because I am a depressed person, but he's doing everything in his power to allow me to realize my dream in touching a ton of people and making them not feel so alone. So that is an incredible gift. And even though, he doesn't quite understand what it means to have existential despair, he has been the best support I could ever imagine. And then my therapist, I was so fortunate. This particular person came recommended to me by a bunch of people, and finding a therapist is like finding a life partner. Like, it usually takes people many, many tries, and especially me, like I've got such a weird personality and I'm so touchy, and it ended up being like Bishert. She and I are just soul sisters. And she was able to make that journey with me and stay right by me in the deepest of despair. And then she partnered with me on bringing it to life on the website. So she made sure that it was therapeutically sound and really helped me to create something that I felt, really could therapeutically help others. So she's now, more than just my therapist. She's helping me with this greater life passion.
And so in the midst of this holiday that says celebration of liberation, tell me how all of this, the book, the website, just the very transparent way you've decided to live your life has been a process of liberation for you.
Yeah. So, we were talking about this. I was talking about it with my mother-in-law who studies the Torah and she was talking about Mitzrayim, for Passover. And I think the LifeLines journey to inner space really asks people to look at their Mitzrayim, the piece of them that is holding them back and keeps them from being free. And my last volume of my book is Liberation, which is, really I had to come to terms with that piece of myself that was holding me back, that fear of, sort of soaring freely, and finally having the courage to sort of jump into the abyss and know that that was the only way I'd truly ever be able to soar.
So you've given so much to so many children around the world. What would you give to young Melissa if you had the opportunity to give it to her?
Well, the great news is one of my biggest joys now is talking to young girls, and I've been doing that. I have a number of conversations coming up, and I've had a number already. And I think what I'm telling them, because they come to me and they're so despondent because they feel like I did, that they're alone and nobody understands them and they're being rejected for who they are at school. And they're in a really dark place. And what I'm telling them is, you are so special. And those things in you that make you highly sensitive are actually your superpowers. And when people look at you kind of with disgust, it's because they're scared of you. They're terrified of your superpowers because they're so special and so cool that they don't even know how to approach you, because you have this gift of being able to see things, to feel things, to hear things, and to know things that most people can't ever know. So hold on to that and know that when people look at you, know Melissa is smiling at you and saying she sees you and she knows how special you are. So I think it's just thinking that the things that we're cursed with are actually our greatest gifts.
Right. And there are folks asking, and I hope this is a fair question, how your relationship with your children has evolved since you've had your own realization.
It's an amazing question. And that's been one of the most challenging, I'd say, parts of the whole thing. We do have two of our daughters involved in LifeLines, which is such a gift. So they are really helping us so much with the community and all our topics and our content. So that's been a gift. But I think, I'd say it's also been a journey because, I was very emotionally repressed, and it really hampered my ability to be, to really understand them, especially in their pain. I was incredible at solving their physical needs and wants, and I was there for them in every sense, like checking everything they could ever want physically off the list. But I think emotionally, when you don't accept yourself in your darkness, it's really hard to accept others in their darkness. And I had a very hard time seeing my kids in pain, emotional pain, and I immediately wanted to fix them. And that was my biggest flaw. Like I couldn't handle them being distraught. And I was like, what's the problem? Let's fix it. Because I couldn't handle myself being distraught and I wanted to deny it or fix it. So I think now accepting myself in the totality of emotion that is actually inside me, I'm better able to see them in their pain. It's still hard for me to tolerate other people's despair. So it's still a weakness of mine to want to fix people, but I'm trying to get better at just hearing someone who's sad or, unhappy and not immediately like having that urge to give them the solution.
Right. So Melissa, first of all, I'm so grateful for this conversation. And
thank you
for your sharing your story with so many others. I think what I want to say to you is, so I don't suffer from existential anxiety and depression. So I have no idea what it's like being inside your head. I don't ask myself the same questions about existence and my purpose that you do. But, I have this vision that, 150 years from now, on some future version of the Antiques Roadshow, somebody is going to walk in with a toy that they found somewhere that they want to get examined, and some expert is going to look at it and say, "Oh, this is a Melissa and Doug toy." And at the time, it was one of the most beloved toys and beloved toy companies ever made, and still is. And the smiles that you've brought to people will be here long after both of us have lived wonderful, happy lives. And
that was beautiful.
Your purpose of existence is so evident to me, and even more so for what you've shared.
That is so beautiful. Oh my gosh, you brought tears to my eyes. And I see this question: do any of your 6 kids have existential depression? No, I have a couple who have anxiety and depression, 2 out of 6, but no one, thank goodness, has existential depression, because that is a scourge. Like I wouldn't wish that on anybody. So no. And by the way, existential depression is so rare that it's not even listed in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. So it's a pretty rare condition. During COVID, I think a lot of people may have existential questions because it's given us all like a little bit of a meaning crisis. But being born with existential despair is less common, thank goodness, because it's a tough one to many folks who are afflicted with it lead really tragic lives.
Right. Boy, an hour goes by so quickly. Melissa, I want to thank you for both, bringing smiles to children who maybe smiles sometimes come easily to, and working so hard to bring smiles to those who maybe it doesn't come so easy to these days, and for living your life so beautifully and transparently. And we're so proud to have you as part of our Upper Fairfield County Jewish community. So thank you for taking an hour in the midst of Passover and sharing it with me and our extended community.
You are the best interviewer. That was amazing. You covered everything and more. So thank you. You have a beautiful way. Thank you.
I wish you tremendous success with the book and the website, and hope that it brings success not only to you, but to those who have a chance to read it and experience. So thank you. And wishing only the best to you and your family. Have a good night.
Thank you so much. Have a good night. Thank you, everyone, for joining me. It means a lot to me.
Take care. Good night.
Bye.